Hello, this is Ken Perry with this week's Boots in the Field report. This weekend brought some spotty rains across the Midwest. Reports coming in from up to 2.5 inches in parts of Iowa to zilch. Here at Crop Tech, we are still in the zilch column. So far, we've had 3 rain events here at Crop Tech in the month of June for a total of and I say 0.29 inches. So a situation where a long stretch here without seeing any water. It's amazing how well a lot of the corn is hanging in there. Here at the Corn College campus, we're still measuring about 2 inches of growth per day. While that's not setting the world on fire, it's still moving in the right direction. The cool nights, clouds, and Canadian smoke are helping us out. Under normal conditions, with adequate water, I would be complaining about the smoky haze that we have been dealing with. It would be shutting down our solar horsepower that we want for rapid growth. But under drought conditions, it's tampering down the solar effect, lessening some of the stress on this crop, and basically nursing it along, if you want to think of it that way. Every day we keep the crop growing, the roots are getting deeper, they're chasing water, and that's what's going to help us slug through this thing. As I look at the amount of area in Canada and the United States under this smoky haze, carrying on for weeks now, it makes me wonder. As we talk about capturing carbon with cover crops, how much carbon has been released into the atmosphere this month alone? And could we ever grow enough cover crops in a lifetime to recapture it? Will it make a difference? Just thinking out loud, which is probably something I shouldn't do. Not all the corn is still growing. In the driest areas, the lightest soils, the corn under unirrigated conditions is starting to go backwards. There's evidence of the plant starting to cannibalize itself to stay alive. These are areas in the field that get in trouble first every year when the water gets a little tight. Now, most years, this is in late July, early August, after pollination leaving us with some crop. This year's yield maps will be important ones for us to identify these areas, and we'll have to have that VRT conversation again. How do we manage around some of this risk? I've been getting calls, making service calls on corn and corn on rye cover fields that have seemed to have stopped growing and are taking on a silver look during the day as this dry weather drones on. Now, these fields don't show yellowing from carbon penalty. Some do, but most of them don't. But they've stopped growing. Now, assuming these fields are treated like corn on soybean fields when it comes to tillage layers or compaction, as well as managing the 4 R's of nutrients and insect feeding, this stunted growth pattern is most likely due to the allopathic effect of decomposing corn stalks or cereal rye. As last year's stalks and this year's cover crop decompose, they leak a toxin into the ground that stunts root growth. This toxin is highly leachable when it rains. Without rain, the toxin load gets higher every day. Some researchers call this the cemetery syndrome. Soybeans don't give off this toxin, and they aren't bothered by this toxin. Other cover crops like radish and annual rye don't release this toxin. The bigger the cereal rye got, the bigger the risk, the more toxin you deal with. Growers are telling me they've never seen cover crops pull down corn or cereal rye pull down corn like this before. The last time we were this dry was 1988, and most likely they weren't growing cover crops, especially cereal rye, ahead of corn. While we can manage around the carbon penalty with our 4R fertility program, there is no way to manage around a drought when it comes to allopathic issues, unless you have irrigation. While I expect everyone is adjusting their expectations as this drought hangs on, expect your corn-on-corn acres to take a bigger hit than the rotated acres, again, unless you have irrigation to flush this toxin out. This week, we're seeing the emergence of Japanese beetle and rootworm beetle. I expect the numbers to be higher this year due to the softer winter. Digging in fields this week, we saw rootworm pupa, rootworm larvae, as well as rootworm flying around our heads. Scouts, watch these April planted fields that are starting to push tassels and silk. These rootworm beetle counts will continue to climb for the next 3 weeks. Now, due to the unevenness of the crop and drought stress, this crop's going to take about 2 weeks to get pollinated. In an ideal world, I'd like it to pollinate the whole field in 3 days. Now, that's a pipe dream in most fields this year due to the drought. Especially fields that were uneven back there at V8, they're going to pollinate the same way. Remember, we need at least a ½ inch of fresh silk to get pollinated. Under drought conditions, silk growth will be slow and pollen viability will be challenged. Don't miss pollination by missing the silk clippers. As many of you are thinking about fungicide applications on corn, my advice is to keep your powder dry and watch for the silk clippers. At any sign of trouble, take out the silk clippers and throw in the fungicide if you want. Many are pressured to pull the trigger on fungicide at first tassel. This year, you could be going back to get the silk clippers 2 weeks later after the fungicide application. Let's not miss the opportunity to do both. At high risk, of course, is the corn-on-corn with no rootworm traits. We are seeing some considerable root feeding in a number of these fields, which indicates that what the above ground pressure will be, especially here in about 3 weeks. Some of this is due to not getting help from Mother Nature with a soft winter or no heavy spring rains to drown these little rascals like we've seen in the past. As these corn plants are stacking nodes, meaning that this crop's going to be about 2 foot shorter than we typically would see, we'll see the tassels start to open up down in the whorl, which unfortunately will reduce the pollen's ability to spread out. So we don't want to add to that clipped silks to the list. We can see tassels from the pickup. Silk clipping, boys, you're going to have to get out there in the field. Some of you are thinking about throwing in the towel and not spraying silk clippers. I've heard the term a couple times this week. If we don't get rain by the 4th, I'm not spending any more money. Boys, that's what we call walking away from a growing crop. And this is something you should never do. Hope I'm clear on that. If you don't get pollinated and it starts raining on July 10th, you can't go back and fix this one. If you say, Ken, okay, I'll spray the silk clippers, but I'm not adding a fungicide. I have no problem with that. Disease will only lower yields. If you don't get pollinated, we have no yield. Because of how slow the silks will grow, a moderate pressure of silk clippers can do a lot of damage. In a year with plenty of moisture, we could have a beetle per plant and it wouldn't make any difference. The silks will outgrow it. So we got to stay on top of this, Scouts. Come back to those fields every 3 days. The bright spot in a lot of operations are the April beans. Many are full bloom R2. As we talk about R1 through R3 beans, our thoughts turn to fungicide on our beans. Here my advice is to wait. Keep the powder dry here as well, and let's see how these spider mites issues develop. Now, we still see some mites this week, some mite predators this week out there. The big predator for spider mite, though, is fungus. And as this drought ticks on, we have less and less fungus to take out the spider mites. If you learned from last year, as we doubled down on our fungicides in corn for tar spot, we fired up the mites. Spraying fungicide with most pyrethroids out there will wipe out all of the mite predators for a couple of weeks, giving the spider mite the upper hand. If you spray a fungicide now and throw an insecticide in that can kill mites, when the mites aren't an issue yet, by the time they are, your insecticide will have run its course and you'll be spraying again. If spider mites do become an issue, our problem, the insecticide selection we have left to work with, is not what we had 10 years ago with the mites of 2012, or what you old-timers would have to work with back there in the spider mite wars of '88. Today, most of our labeled products only kill the adults and don't get the eggs, meaning you're going to be spraying again in 10 days or 2 weeks. Small list of insecticides that kill the eggs don't kill the adults. So you need to have a conversation now with your supplier to come up with a plan A or plan B on handling the spider mite outbreak if it does show up. If you plan for it and it starts raining, nothing lost but a little bit of time. Last week I mentioned it might be a good idea to stop mowing road ditches. For some of you, I know this is like going against your religion. As one grower said, Ken, I don't let the grass in my ditches get high, so I shouldn't have a problem with the mites. Well, the mites in tall grass have no correlation. That's not how it works. Usually the first mite outbreaks come off of mowed lawns up next to cornfields near subdivisions. When that mite population gets high and the food source is scarce, they're going to shoot a web in the air, a parachute, and blow or drift to a new location, wherever the wind takes them. They don't fly anywhere. They don't go looking for food. They just shoot up a web and parachute on. Don't let the mites stress these beans as they're going through the R stages. Watch the edges for live mites and try to treat them before the beans show stress. Wheat harvest is underway in several places, especially south. Hearing field averages so far from 50 bushel to 110. Some areas were lucky enough to see rain last weekend, so getting double crop beans in and getting them germinated is a good possibility in those situations. Here at Corn College, the cracks are getting big. Now, not wanting to lose anyone in a crack during our field day or at Corn College, we've dragged out the irrigation equipment and started irrigating our outside classrooms. We'll irrigate a portion of each of our outside classrooms, and a portion will stay dry land. When it comes to showcasing the sins of spring, the dry land portions show some amazing things. And as I've said before, in a normal year you can commit 2, maybe 3 sins of spring and get away with it. But in a drought, 1 sin can cause a chain reaction that gets hard to recover from. In the past, by the time we go to work to drag out all of our irrigation equipment and start this process, it begins to rain. If that is the case, it'll be well worth it. We have received notification that we've been approved for 13 CEU credits for the Farm Journal Soybean Corn College here July 25th, 26th at Hayworth. To get registered or to see the CECs and how they're split up and a full agenda, visit our website, croptechinc.com. Click on the Corn Soybean College tab. As you guys knock out the wheat acres, don't forget to call them in so we can get them soil tested. We'll be starting our virtual farm visits after the 4th. Those of you already signed up, we'll be calling you to nail down dive sites most likely next week. Anyone who wants to put fields on the virtual farm visit and hasn't called in already, just give us a shout here at the office or shoot us an email and we'll walk you through it. When we look at the rainfall for April 1st through June 10th, it is the second driest on record. Only 1988 was drier. As I talk with growers throughout the day, I can hear and feel the anxiety that is building with this crop stress. This anxiety is much higher with the younger growers. And as I think about it, for most of them, they weren't born in the drought of 1988, and a lot of them were in high school in 2012. This is the first time when a drought has affected their bottom line. For you seasoned vets out there, you can help these guys by sharing your stories on how drought is part of farming and they need to stay engaged through this process. Don't let social media make their decisions for them. It may also help to do some good there to explain how crop insurance has changed compared to what you guys had to deal with in '88. Let's all forget about this crop over the 4th and celebrate the fact that we get to farm in this great country. To stay up to date, check out our website at croptechinc.com and subscribe to our podcast, Boots in the Field Report. Keep her safe, keep her moving.